welcome everybody to the latest webinar. Let me bring this up. I didn't do that, did I? Let me do this, and let's share that. That should be working. Let's see. Nope, not yet. There we go. Welcome everybody to the latest in our webinar series. This one here is going to be advanced karting analysis techniques, and what we're trying to tie it all together with some of the stuff that we've seen in the recent past with some of the different webinars, and also then using, while we are going to use karting data, there is a lot that we're going to talk about here that is going to be stuff we haven't necessarily covered, but we'll go across all different forms of motorsports. So you know, some neat little tips and tricks that we're going to talk about, and analysis techniques, and some other things that should make this be of value for everybody. But of course, yeah, it is karting data. So our co-host today, Eric Gunderson. Eric's coming back, and he's here in his third webinar with us as a co-host, getting more and more comfortable all the time, I suppose. Thanks for being here, Eric. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna look at some again some slightly different things, and tie together a few things that we talked about. So again, make sure that you throw any questions into the question and answer, and we will bring those up. But just before we introduce and start chatting with Eric a little bit more, let's have a poll today, and we're going to have, I think, 3 of them today. And the first one I want to talk about is one we've done a little bit in the past. We love to see what everybody has as far as hardware. It helps us as we're doing the planning and getting ready to put together the next set of webinars. So this is what aimsports hardware do you own and use? You know, select all that apply, and we're limited to only 10 slots. So if you SmartyCam Other is that last choice down there. If it's other, type other, select other, and then go up into the chat box, and other equals, you know, whatever it happens to be. So that will and we study these, and we look at them, and we continually adjust what we're putting out there as far as content based on all of the polls, all of the feedback we get, emails, phone calls, you know, after the webinar, stuff like that. So I do appreciate everybody helping us out with stuff like that. We'll take that one away in just in another 5 seconds or so. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that very quickly, and then I'm going to click over here. And let's go to the next slide. And so let's end that poll right here. And Eric, you've been helping us here for a little bit lately. Eric's out of the Colorado area. He runs a karting shop called Point Karting. What got us together is certainly Eric is an aimsports dealer and a kart shop. But what got us together was his desire to train and help and support people across the board. But specifically on our side, you know, he's done some of his own AIM webinars, seminars, I'm sorry, on site, and gives training to all the different users in the area. And that's something that's special to us as well. So I do appreciate that, and love that you do that, Eric. And then he has been coming to these as well, and been helping us out quite a bit as far as some little bit of perspective from the karting side. So Eric, give us a little bit about you, and then when you finish that up, we'll bring up some some of our data, and we'll jump in.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for everyone tuning in, and Roger, thanks for having me back, and everyone behind the scenes, appreciate it. I've been in kart racing and motorsports in general for about 15 years now, and started racing karts myself. Now operate a business as Roger mentioned, pointkarting.com. So we do a lot of sales and retail here in the Colorado region as well as nationwide, including the AIM and the MyChron products specifically. In addition to that, I've always had an interest in the data and using that in the performance driver coaching I do. And we're very lucky to have an engaged user group here that really wants to learn how to use their device. So we do some local trainings and things like that. And participating in these has given me a great perspective to interact with some people all over the country, and hopefully share some of the things I've learned using Race Studio and Race Studio 2, and hopefully very soon Race Studio 3. So just happy to be here and excited to participate in another one.
I appreciate that a lot, and you say that you're lucky to have an engaged user group that likes to talk about that. But let's never, let's keep that in mind, that that engaged user group doesn't become engaged if there's not somebody there to help them and spark that interest. So kudos to you for being that guy. So everybody appreciates that. The I saw a question in the question and answer before we actually jump in. While Eric and I haven't practiced or talked a lot about what we're going to talk about. We like to keep these as conversational as possible. But it was talking about GPS and how can we look straight down on the GPS and understand driving lines and some of those. I think you're going to see in today's presentation, I don't remember the fellow's name that asked it, but I think what you're going to see in today's presentation is that exact style of analyzing data by looking at the GPS first, looking at driven line, and then understanding what happened from there. So that I think that question is going to be answered directly with some good examples. So the next thing, oops, let's jump out of that, new share, and let's jump into some data real quickly. What we've got here is what we're going to do is we're going to look at some different things, and what we're going to try to tie together is Eric had some previous, his two previous data analysis sessions that he co-hosted with us were, some basic stuff on karting, and then you have that 15-minute view of that quick download. Okay, what do we look at? And then this one here, we're going to take it to a little bit of a different level and go a bit more advanced. And what we really want to do is, there are so many MyChron 5s and 4s that are out there, 3s, that you're getting data, but don't have a ton of extra sensors, right? And so what we want to do is show some ways of looking at the data a little bit deeper, and this of course will work on the sports cars or the dirt oval guys or those things as well. But what we want to look for is we've got the basics, the GPS channels, the RPM, the cylinder head temper, what water temperatures, whatever, kind of the basic thing that most of you probably have on your karts. But how to get some good information out of that from your MyChron data. And then we want to also then take it in a little bit, and let's throw some additional sensors at it that you can add to your MyChrons as well, and show how we get to that same kind of data, but even with more granularity, with more accuracy, and you can see the difference of adding that additional channel, whether it be throttle position or brake or steering or whatever it happens to be, to get even more information and see if that's something that might be of interest to you. So what I'd like to do now is talk about, we're going to look at three chunks of data. We've got this is some shifter kart data. We're going to talk a little bit about this. Then we're going to go into make the full swap down to the Briggs L206, which is just a huge popular class all across the nation, and it is so competitive. And there's low horsepower, which means data and that whole driver, getting the driver to be up to speed is even more important. And you can't lose, a mile an hour coming onto the straightaway, or else half the field passes you by. So then we're going to transition over and look at some of this Briggs L206 data, and then we're going to, at the end, we're going to go and look at a kart, one of the Rotax DD2. They're a fairly fast kart. They're a 2-speed with a good chunk of power. And on that one there, we've got a lot of sensors. So we'll do some of the stuff we looked at in these first two, and then we'll apply it again into that one, and then add the additional sensors and see how we can clarify some of the stuff we're going to talk about even more so with additional sensors. Anything you want to add there, Eric? Or you think we're pretty close to where we're going to head?
I think that's a pretty good summary. I think the biggest thing I would add is this webinar is going to build off of a little bit of previous data that we've looked at, as well as the DD2 is some data we haven't specifically presented in this particular webinar. But regardless, remember to use your tools. We're going to have these data available for people to download if you want to follow directly along with it. But the overall theme here is there are some things you can do in Race Studio 2 and things that might be a little bit beyond what you can do, in the 10 minutes that you have, say, between sessions, unless you have it preset. But say you're debriefing at the end of the day, or you really want to dig into, okay, I see my available channels, but why I still don't have an answer to why I'm struggling. That Race Studio 2 can unlock. And that's really what this is going to be focused on, is both showing you things that you can do with kind of out of the box packages, such as the MyChron 5 without additional sensors, and then what do those additional sensors allow us to do? Because it's great for us to have those additional sensors and say, oh, look, there's my steering trace, but how can we use those in a meaningful way in data to actually not only have those additional channels, but make use of them and come to an additional, more informed conclusion. So I'm hoping that by the end of this, we'll have demonstrated that as well.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. That. Yeah. Exactly. Perfectly said. I noticed that over in the chat there's a Briggs, a momentum cart. Yes, momentum is more important, but I'm of the view that that all race cars, carts, boats, motorcycles, trucks, they're all momentum vehicles, right? It's just some of them are more important than on these low horsepower 4-stroke Briggs L206 carts, super competitive, and boy, you make one little error and you're half a mile an hour off. It you pay for it more so than you do in a shifter cart typically. So okay, so let's start this process. I'm just going to kind of turn it over. Let me double click that so we can get that kind of scaled right. I'm going to turn this over to Eric. I think Eric, all you got to do is click one time and start to kind of look at this data, and let's just chat about some different things, that maybe what you see and some different things, and what can we get out of this in this short term discussion, and then what would we do later to dig in?
So for those of you that haven't seen this data before, I believe we covered this in the first webinar that I was part of. We talked about several different data sets, and this was one that I used as an example of, to someone's question earlier, looking at a variety of driving lines, as well as looking at what Roger likes to call the money channels. So your speed, your lateral and longitudinal acceleration. And one of the biggest things I was trying to come away with this data in particular was that this driver had a habit of overdriving. They would drive into the corner really, really, really hard, kind of what I'll call colloquially park it in the middle of the corner, and then really be inconsistent coming off. But what if, for example, in that same period of time, I was an engine builder, or I'm trying to figure something out about my gearing, or as a driver, and this is where this will be much more relevant to especially a lot of our racers that drive, a Mazda Miata or a sports car, or just anything that obviously has a gearbox. Not everything in karting does. But there's additional channels that if you set the MyChron 5, for example, up to be a gearbox setting, that you'll have allowance to. So here at the very bottom, we have an aim calculated gear chart. Above that, we have the RPM channel, and above that still is our speed channel. So for the sake of simplicity and kind of to illustrate what I wanted to look at today, I don't want to pull up multiple laps, but I want to build upon what we had talked about before. So in our previous discussion, we never really looked at this, but if I look more closely at the RPM channel, I'll notice, here, of course, in a traditional go-kart with a single speed, you're not going to see gear changes. But we can see as this driver transitions down the straightaway, and we'll go to the last corner onto kind of the final back straightaway. This is at SCUSA Super Nationals a couple years ago. We can see obviously the oscillations in the RPM band as the driver transitions through the different gears. Now, if I had multiple laps pulled up, I could compare when they apply the throttle and their particular power band as they go along the straightaway. But more importantly, what we can see now, if we use an additional channel like the one we have below with the aim calculated gear, we can actually see when they're actually changing gears. So we can see the duration of their gear changes, as well as when they're actually physically in different gears, as well as what gear they're actually in. So whether you are in a shifter cart or a sports car, anything that has multiple gears in the transmission, this is a very common discussion people have. Are you in second or in third or fourth in that particular corner? What gears are we using? Should we go to a different gear ratio? That sort of thing. And so this is going to be an example of something that's a little bit more advanced than what you might use traditionally at the track. The other thing I wanted to bring this up for, okay, we have one request for using a slightly brighter color on those.
Do it for you?
Yeah, sure.
On all of them. I think what I will do is, and we'll fight this a little bit as we go, but maybe we'll do a little bit of a thicker line, and that should help. And then if we do the gear with a lighter blue, that should get everybody what they're looking for. That teal on black is Robbie's favorite. There you go. hopefully that'll do it.
So, you know, if I was critiquing this from a driving standpoint, you know, one thing I would notice looking at my RPM trace is, you know, I can see very crisp, even upshifts here on the back straightaway. But I noticed that particularly, you know, this particular one here from third, and then he's going to begin transitioning, you know, up to fourth. We can see there are some periods here where the driver either hesitates a little bit or doesn't quite get their gear timing right. This would be an example of more of a driver coaching suggestion where I would pull up multiple laps and I would compare those different ones and see, okay, you know, do I need to talk to this driver about, okay, we need to be a little bit sooner on pulling the gear back in third or fourth. We need to change our shift timing, use a different reference point, that sort of thing, or perhaps change the shift indicators on their MyChron. Some drivers like that. The other thing I wanted Roger to talk about in this particular case is I've had multiple people come to me with the request of, hey, I have my aim calculated gearing pulled up, but it seems like I'm off a gear. I know I'm in third or fourth, you know, or third at that particular section of track, right? Because I've been counting in my head, but MyChron, the race studio, is saying I'm in fifth or in fourth. And so what's going on there? So Roger, can you talk us through how to make that correction for people that are having that issue on a shifter cart or even on a car?
Yeah, it goes across the board again, as you say, right? This particular one, this is a big race, and no doubt, looking at this data, the driver was of the cart was pretty good. And it's showing that we're only in fifth gear at the highest spot on the at the back, you know, the back straightaway here. And we know that they would have, and the driver has told you when we got this data that they were actually in sixth gear, and this is all off by one selection, right? The way the math channels work in here is I'm going to bring it up just so we can see it. There's an aim gear position math channel. We've talked about it briefly in the past, but not fixing it or looking at it and working it a little bit closer. This aim gear channel, which is in your list of aim default channels. So I brought it, it's over here in this data set. And it's just gear and then parentheses, and then it asks you what are the two channels, the speed, the engine RPM, and the speed, which two channels do you have that match that? This particular case, they've got an RPM and they've got their GPS speed. They do not have a wheel speed, so we're using GPS speed. And then and those are followed by commas. If you very close to, a little bit different, but the same syntax as what we used in Ray Phillips' webinar last Thursday. Robbie might put a link up to it. The power of if. Ray went into a lot of detail in these commas and the brackets and some of these other things for different things. So you might want to watch that one if you missed it. But what's important about the gear one, it's a little bit of a different channel. It's asking you for what is the engine channel and what is the speed. And then these next two are asking you what is the lowest gear used during the bulk of the laps and what is the highest gear. And we think that the first gear was used on the slowest corner, and we'll check it out again in a minute. And that instead of fifth gear, the reason this is stopping at fifth and only calculating up to fifth is because the math channel is telling it that, hey, there isn't no place on this track are we in sixth gear, so it's trying to force it all into this nice little compact area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that 5 to a 6. And then and I'll pull this out of the way, and now we can see how these are compressed down here, and this is fifth gear here. As soon as I click on the OK button, you'll see that it's what it's done is now it's in sixth gear at the end of the straightaway, and we've got one spot over here on this super slow corner. You know, it's a V-min of 22 miles per hour, and the driver's getting to first gear, which is what I understand the driver had given feedback is I'm in low gear on the one, and I'm in top of sixth gear RPM wise, and in gear position at the end of the other one. So what you need to do is if they didn't change their gearing and they went to a short track at a local club race instead of a high speed straightaway like this, all of a sudden this thing was still going to think it's trying to get to sixth, and we may need to come in and tweak that math channel around for different tracks, right? But for generally speaking, it's that easy to fix. So keep that in mind, and then we can start to look at a little bit better and okay, what gear was he in on this corner? What was the low RPM, coming off of that corner? He was still at 11,000 RPM, even though he was in second gear and exiting that corner. So that's how you fix the gear position channel.
So we have a question from Art, who says he autocrosses a shifter kart. He has a TM kart engine, and his question actually is, I think we're going to at least answer it in part as we get a little more advanced with some of the math channels we're getting into. But he says, I autocross a shifter kart, and are there any secrets to determining which gear I should be in for each corner with only a limited number of runs? The first thing I would say, Art, is if you've ever taken your engine to an engine builder or to someone locally that really understands your particular track or your particular gearing, talking with them is probably a good first step. To understand, okay, this particular engine really likes this range in the power band, or really, we shouldn't drop below this certain minimum RPM. As an example, for example, the Rotax DD2, you really typically want to stay above about 8,000 RPM as your minimum. And that is a good way, without getting too advanced, for you to simply look at your RPM trace and say, okay, I've dropped below a certain minimum threshold. Now I'm out of, the traditional power band. However, if you want to get a little bit more in depth than that, Roger and I are going to walk you through building some custom channels to talk about percentage of time on a lap where you are below the power band, or the amount of distance that you are either above or below, really where you want to be kind of in the meat of that power band of your engine. And that's a way for you to basically, in a black and white way, use the data to tell you with those limited numbers of runs to keep iterating and changing which particular gears you are in, as you go around the autocross course. So hopefully that as we go through this will be a little bit more clear.
Yeah, pretty difficult to do in autocross because you don't get a chance to, you may go to the same area and have another one, but they've changed the track, right? So it a couple things that I look for real quickly is find that top gear. If you, whichever gear, maybe you only want to run into fourth gear or something, or if you gear it to get to the top of sixth gear at the fastest spot, identify that fastest spot and then start to look where that, after your first run, look at where your highest speed is, figure out and know what gear you're in and what kind of RPM are you running. Optimally, in a perfect world, you would want to space those gears out evenly. You should be top speed in the top gear at the end of the longest straightaway, right? And then the rest of the gears will fall in, and hopefully you're not splitting a gear on many of the slow corners where you have to shift in the middle of corners or something. But you work it. This one here, if you look at this before we jump out of the shifter kart data, look at the here we are at the back straightaway, and you can kind of see that this that they have whether or not it was a practice or a final or whatever, but you see how the RPM is kind of going flat as it's coming up here. The RPM comes up, and then it's going flat right here, and it's at from about 80.7 miles per hour. The darn motor seems to be it's hit its limit, right? It's accelerating well right up to that number of about 12.6, 12.7, and then it goes flat. In a perfect world, maybe this person would come back in and would, as long as it didn't affect maybe how you're hitting some of these slow corner exits and not being able to pull, you might want to bring that gearing up a little bit so it would pull the rest of the way, till they get off the throttle. So you can see that flat side. The other thing that I find interesting in this data, just another way of looking at gearing and driver improvements, is what I see here is the drivers is pretty good. You see that the motor tends to want to go flat or hits the rev limiter or whatever it is right here. They end up with, look at what the driver is doing in these shifts coming off this low speed corner, and 12.6 on that shift. And if we come to the next shift, it's if I can get to the peak of it, I may want to zoom in, but 12.6 on the peak of that shift, and on this one, 12.6 on the peak of that shift, and the motor is flattening out at 12.7 or 12.6, 12.7. So he's within 100 RPM on all of his upshifts. And if you scan across this, it's pretty darn close on every single one of them. He's within 100 RPM of when the motor starts to fall off. I look at that very quickly, and so I find out where where the thing is probably running out of power, and how good is the driver doing of maximizing all the rest of the shifts. And you can just eyeball across this and get a pretty good handle on that. We'll look at some, like Eric mentioned, we're going to do some math channels in a second that help us even clean that up a little bit more. So pretty interesting stuff. Anything else you want to add here to the shifter data, Eric, before we move on?
Not so much. I think I would say, from just a driver coaching standpoint, one of the things we see a lot on the surveys here is a lot of people love worked examples. So this one, more than most other data sets that I particularly looked at, was a very, very good example of a driver consistently making the same mistake. In many different corners. It was very dramatic to see on the data. So if you're curious what that sort of behavior looks like, because it's more rare to see it being done over and over and over and over again, I would suggest checking out that first webinar we did, because to me, it was one of my favorite data sets that I've collected, I guess, informally over time working with different drivers.
Yeah, Robbie will put that link up, I'm sure, in just a moment. The driver is doing a great job of the mechanicals of driving the cart. And what Eric mentioned in that first webinar is sometimes, and this is fairly easy for us to fix as driver coach data guys, right? It's easier to slow somebody down than trying to get them to go faster, right? So we were in the first webinar, you were able to come up and see where he was entering some of these corners pretty consistently too fast, which was giving him a slow exit. And so we're not going to go through that this time, but if you want to see how that works, go ahead and take a look at that first webinar. Okay, the first webinar with Eric. Let's close this one out and let's go to the L206 data and take a look at this. Is where we're going to jump in and see some. There we go. Some other kind of interesting things. Let's do this. I got a user profile. I'll thicken those lines back up, I think, in a moment. L206 home. Let's load that one. And let's thicken those lines up so everybody can see them a little bit better. I didn't save them that way, so we have to do this every time. Hopefully that'll work out for you. Okay, give us a little story on this data, Eric, and what we kind of want to look at.
Sure. So let's go ahead and take manual control here, and there we go. I wanted to pull up one other lap as well. So, the L206 data is where I spend most of my time working with a lot of drivers, spend a lot of time working with 206 drivers. And as Roger mentioned, if you make a small mistake, you move your hand slightly too much, there's really nowhere to hide. And it really, really compounds itself. So what we've done in this particular example, and this was a track in Phoenix, with a driver, is we wanted to find a few different places to look at the existing data using some of our traditional channels, and then introduce something that would be a math channel that you can incorporate afterwards. This would be a great example and a great thing to do if you are in a momentum type race car. And Roger's right. Fundamentally, every vehicle out there is a momentum type race car. But with less horsepower, typically there's less places to hide. If you make a mistake, the same mistake over the same period of time compounds more, right? So, and nothing's more as dramatic as, say, an L206 engine. So, yeah, Formula V, that's a great example of a road racing car, formula car that would fit that same bill. So we talked about looking at the GPS-driven line, and hopefully this is a better example of that. One of the things, personally, I'm a very, very visual person, so I love the measures graph, but I will typically look at the GPS-driven line first, and I look for areas of variance. So naturally, I see, down here being one area. I see up here out of a broad sweeping corner. Because I've been to this track, I have a little bit more context. So I know that this particular corner is a very flat out high speed left-hand corner that obviously you can see leads onto a long back straightaway. You can see that we go in the counterclockwise direction on this particular track. So I'm naturally drawn to this difference here. So if I zoom in a little bit, I can see that on these two laps, I'll just call them red and teal to keep them similar, the teal being slightly slower in lap time, we can see a wider radius was used from the center of the corner outward versus the red. Now, they have about the same turn-in, same behavior for the first half of the corner, but we can see that the second half of the corner, one was a little bit tighter to the inside of the track versus the other one. If we look at our lateral acceleration at this period of time, we can see some behavior that's rather interesting. So what I notice right here is this little, and I can go ahead and zoom in for people if it's a little hard to see. Maybe that's a little too far to make it as dramatic.
Just one. Just click on that one once.
Yep, doing my best. There we go.
Yeah, it's hard to point with the little zoom delay.
So in an ideal world, your lateral acceleration trace should kind of look like a very almost inverted U shape. Anytime we see any of these bobbles or mistakes here, or these sharp rises or falls, that's usually a sign, especially in a low horsepower go-kart, just visually, before I even look at the consequences here, my eye is drawn to this area right here. And what this tells me is right about here, and let's call that about 2/3 of the way through the corner, the driver is making an additional steering adjustment. And we can see because the lines separate, obviously that means that they're a slightly different adjustment. It also follows that our driving lines are a little bit different. So I also see afterwards in this full speed, long straightaway that there is a difference in speed along the final end of the straightaway. So all those things are starting to come together to tell me a little bit about what exactly is going on here. That there's a variance in my steering trace, and that my RPM is varied, and that also my end speed along the straightaway is varied. But really understanding why with something so minute, right, to the naked eye, where you could say, well, that squiggle looks about the same as maybe that squiggle, is not always super helpful. So this is an area where if we didn't have additional tools, or we didn't know about math channels, maybe putting a GoPro or an AIM Smarty Cam near the driver's hands to look and see what they're doing might be helpful for someone like me, or for the average driver. But we also have some additional tools that we can use and build in Race Studio to kind of give us a little bit more of that context. So let's see, if we open up the Radius tool here, and Roger, if you want to pause and talk about this tool or how you created it, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, let me just show the math channel real quickly. And again, this is available to all of you that want to download the math channel. I think Robbie might have already put the link up, but the link for the data, the math channels, and the user profiles will always be in the description box in YouTube within about an hour of us finishing. So if you don't grab it, if the chat box went past and you didn't grab it or don't have the ability to, don't worry about it. It'll be available in about an hour. The math channel for this particular one, radius in feet, is what this is. For those of you that are in the metric units, we would have to adjust it a little bit to make it work for you, but that's fairly easily done. But so here's a math channel, and what the output of it is the number of feet that of the radius that is being driven, and it's remarkably accurate. And we're going to look at it here in a couple of ways here in just a second. But what it basically it is as the driver is driving around this corner over here in the GPS area of the map over here, when they're driving around, just think about it in a way that maybe there's a rope tied to the cart, and there's a pin in the ground, right here in the middle of this corner. And the number that we're getting from the radius in feet is how far it is from the GPS sensor to the point that it's pivoting around, right? So what's interesting about that is we always have these conversations of, we've got a radius, and is the corner opening up or increasing radius, or is it a decreasing radius? And you have to drive that differently. And if you look at this real quickly, you can kind of see that the driver's fairly flat, more or less straight, and starts turning kind of slow. And the corner is probably its tightest right in this area, right? And then from about here on, the radius is getting bigger. If we were to tie a string from here, that radius point would be way over here, right? And to have that rotate around that point. So that's what this channel is giving us, is how tightly is the driver going around. You may not have a steering sensor, but this radius is almost an inverse of a steering sensor. You can kind of see what the driver is doing. Yeah, there's a disconnect sometimes with sliding the cart or whatever, but it really does give you a pretty good idea of what it's looking at. So just wanted to explain what it was, kind of what it looks like. Now let's dig in and see what it looks like in this corner that that Eric was talking about. They're kind of stacked on top of each other because it's such a tight corner. The way that this works for your eye is when we're down here and going through an extremely tight corner, the one just before it, you see how it's really close to zero, right? The numbers are fairly small. The blue one running this particular spot right here at a 36-foot radius, and the red at a 44, and you can kind of see that in the shape of the two GPS driven lines here. If I zoom in, you can see that the red one probably tightened it up right here and was driving a tighter radius here, because the blue one came in a little bit driver's right and was still flowing and with a little bit bigger arc through there, and then probably had to tighten it up here at the end, which we will see, right here, right? So the let's go back to that corner that we were talking about, and Eric can kind of take over a little bit, but we see that point where the driver had to give it a little bit more of a pull on the blue one right here. And why would the driver do that? We always go through this: what happened, where it happened, why did it happen? Eric was really found a cool way that his eyes just seen this distinct difference in driven line. That's the what happened. The driver's off. The driver on the blue one is a little bit farther to the right. Where did it happen? It's happening on corner exit. And why? And what was the penalty, right? Kind of let's add another piece to it. Because the blue one started out here wider and was out here the entire way, the red one went ahead and ran a tighter radius around this corner. And by the time they got here, the red one is flat to the floor. The blue one is as well. But now the blue one's having to turn a little bit more to not fall off the edge of the track. And that's where you get this, where the red one is starting to open their hands and the blue one is still turning at a much tighter radius, 170-foot tighter radius at this point, trying to make sure it doesn't fall off the edge of the track. We've seen the same thing in the, let me get that out of the way, in the lateral Gs. The blue one starts to free up right with the red one back here. Trouble is they freed it up and then they had to turn again and add more lateral G back into it. Even though we don't have a steering sensor, you can interpolate that the releasing hands, and it went to either flat for a little bit and then had to add more lateral Gs to it. We had to turn a little sharper here at the end to not fall off the track. That binds up a kart, right? Especially in karting where it's a solid rear axle. And then look what happened. Boy, down here is about the middle of that corner, right about here. The two of them are, but we could actually probably move around here a little bit. Right there, virtually the same speed, within a 1/10 of a mile per hour, both of them the same right here. The driver's choice to go ahead and miss that apex a little bit, or do a great job on the red one. We'd almost have to have a third one to know which is we know which one's faster, right? We're going to see it in a second. And then with this added little pole, look what happens. It starts to separate the red and the blue speed trace. The red one, because he's able to get on the throttle, start opening his hands, get that kart to not be bound up, all of a sudden it went from being almost the exact same speed. And here towards the exit of the corner, let's just put a click right there just to pick it up. Now all of a sudden there's 0.3 miles an hour faster on the red one. And as we come out here where they're really starting to flatten out as far as being straight in the same, both of them on acceleration, now we're almost up to a full mile per hour difference. And it's all based on this little problem that the driver, how they attack this corner way back here is affecting. I'm going to come out just a tick on our zoom. If we go all the way to the end, that driver is a good chunk faster, even through the kink. This kink on the back straightaway it pulled both of them down. But it's still faster. We could use the delta tool and say all the way from here to here at the end, right to there, the driver, that one little error way back here cost the driver, oops, I lost the cursor, lost the driver 0.2 of a second because of the full length of that straightaway. So they just an interesting way of looking at it, either with the radius or the lateral Gs, and then seeing what the end result of that and the with the why did it happen, and then what was the penalty. Penalty was almost 0.2 in a class that 0.2 is 10 positions, right, in qualifying. So Eric, what do you have anything else to add to that? You see anything else that I missed?
I don't think that you missed anything necessarily. I think it's just important to note that such a minute thing without the addition of something like that radius tool or the math channel, you could easily get that confused with, well, I just need to run a different line. And I think the difference here is looking at saying, well, they both had the same line going into the corner and they both essentially reached that same apex point, but then there was a divergence from that. And why did that happen? Why did that particular decision happen? And it all had to do with basically where the drivers started to release their hands. It wasn't so much the line they were driving, it was the decision they made partway through the corner. And obviously those two things are very different. If we gave as an instructor the feedback to our driver or as ourselves, well, I just need to run a tighter line, you could still make this same mistake and still be losing that little bit of time. And we can see, again, on a very low horsepower go-kart like this, it continues to add up. Forgive me if I mispronounce your first name, but Thies.
Tice.
Tice.
Everybody knows how to pronounce that. An inside joke, Eric. I have messed it up the entire time, and him and I talked on email, and I figured out how to say it. So yeah, you're doing fine. Tice.
He's asking about the 3 spikes in that particular channel between 900 and 1150.
Let's talk about that. And I did see it, and I was going to actually catch it before we moved on. We are going to have to move on a little bit, but what this math channel does, if you look at it, and I'm no math channel expert, but because it's a band pass and we're telling it that after it does all this math, if the number is, because a radius, when you're going down a straightaway, it's never perfectly straight, right? The radius just happens to be huge is how it works, right? And because of that, I don't want to see a 10,000 foot radius as you're just barely going left and right down the straightaway, because that's in effect mathematically how it would work. So because of the way this math channel is written, if it gets above 2,000, in this case, either left or right, negatives for left-hand corners, positives for right-hand corners. If it gets above a 2,000 foot radius, it jumps back to 0. So what you're seeing here is these are very, very small radius, turning around this corner in, 75, 80 feet. And you'll always notice that it'll start to head towards bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it gets above 2,000 feet, it snaps back to 0. Okay?
So those are almost places where they're going so perfectly straight that the radius that it would theoretically be is if that makes sense, essentially it's just massive.
Huge radius is above 2,000, it's going to snap to 0. And what they did here is they turned the wheel just a little bit for part of that straightaway, and the radius they were driving fell under 2,000, so it got to 1,400. So all of a sudden the math channel showed us that, right? So that blue one actually was turning just a little bit right there, and then he actually went the other way with his hands. Maybe he was moving the cart over to the outer edge, getting ready for the kink that's coming, right? Moving the cart over. That's why you're seeing these jumps up and down. Just as we take it, anything above anything bigger than a 2,000 foot radius, we snap it back to 0. Makes it much easier to see, and you don't have these spikes going up and down all the time. So that's what the spikes are. And the other one was there wasn't a note in there that was talking about Antonio's. Is a good idea to compare G-sum channels with different laps, or to focus on the laterals. Yes. But it's whatever works for you and whatever the situation draws. We were really going to focus on this particular one we weren't going to look at the transition between braking, the longitudinal and into the lateral. We were going to we really wanted to focus on the radius and the lateral side of it. So that's why we're using that. If you want to focus on the transition, a good place to do that, let me jump out to the full lap so we can see it. A good place to look at the G-sum would be more on this corner where you're on the brakes hard and transitioning turning. That would be a great place for the G-sum, where you're actually balancing the braking and the turning. So you want to know the sum of the forces and how the driver's handling that. So great question, Antonio. I appreciate that. And the one last thing before we go on to another topic here is we talked about that corner, right? This corner right here, and we talked about the exit and what it did right here. But darn it, if you really look at it, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit farther back and start and just take this whole piece. We really looked at this big long left-hander and the transition and how all of a sudden it was faster on the way out with the red lap. Isn't it interesting that problem really started, if you start to really think about it? It happened here where the blue cart tried to overcharge this corner, okay? And he came in so hot into this tight right-hander that he overshot the corner a little bit, and if we come in here a little bit, we'll see it. He came in here, he dove down to the inside because he was so much faster, 38 to 42. And because of that, he could not get the cart to rotate as well at that speed. So he ended up rolling through the middle of that corner slow because he's got it so bound up. And now all of a sudden, he's over here to the driver's left, and he's trying to force it over, which probably caused this little problem here beyond. It's always a game of trying to understand. You know, we didn't even talk about this part before, and often a corner before is what actually has created the perfect storm for the little bit of an error that's missing it here. It's because he missed this one back here. We think it just, and maybe just that radius, but in effect, it was because he went in too hot, entering 2 corners ahead of it. So just as you're doing your driver coaching, this would be, you know, maybe give up a little bit here. You'll get this speed here like crazy. You can see that the blue one, if we put the cursor right here, we're virtually the same on the time compare bar. Him hustling it in there so crazy on that blue lap, it did gain him for a little bit. It gained him about 8/800ths, right? Almost a tenth. But the trouble is on the way out, before it even started to balance out right here, now he's 11 behind, right? So in effect, he lost a couple of tenths right there. He gained a tenth, lost a tenth, just on this first part, and let alone not getting the cart to rotate, and then he lost that additional tenth on the way up, 2 tenths on the way, the rest of the way on the straightaway. So it's what happened, where it happened, why did it happen. It's always a little bit deeper. So perfect. Yeah, Richard, it always started before the turn before. It actually started the turn before. I didn't see that until I just glanced over there. So all good information, right? Okay.
So probably for the sake of time, we might want to move on to the DD2 data, because
Okay.
One of the examples we were going to work with this, we also incorporate into the DD2 data.
Let's open that up.
With isolating some of the power band, which gets back to one of the initial questions some people ask.
Let me fix a couple things. Let me fix the line width real quickly so we can all see it a little bit better. I save these profiles at what I like, which is a little bit thinner line, I'm sorry. And I also need to scale, I'm gonna scale the RPM a little bit differently here. So, and we'll see why in a second, why it doesn't scale correctly.
And maybe while he's working on that, Rudy, you mentioned the bogging channel for the LO206. A great question. What we're going to go through here is going to show you how to apply it, regardless of the engine. It's kind of an arbitrary example. You can change the RPM, the minimum or the maximum RPM, depending on how you want to scale it for a DD2, a shifter, those sorts of things. The reason we wanted to move on, keep in mind, this cart now has a couple additional sensors. So it's going to show us, hopefully what we're going to demonstrate here is not only the ability to create these math channels, but then use those additional sensors to further narrow down exactly the range that we want to look at, and therefore the determination that we're going to make even more accurate.
Perfect. We were going to look at the bogging channel in the L206, but we're going to look at it here as well. So we'll use it in both. So where do we want to start? Do we want to jump right into the bogging thought process, Eric? Is that where we want to jump?
I would think so.
Okay, let's jump in there. We can see the other stuff too, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's just talk about how I've set this up. Let me make the widths a little bit wider so everybody can see it. It only takes a second. What I've done here is we've set up in the upper half here is RPM, right? That's the red trace for this particular one. Something that we haven't talked about here yet in any of our webinars, but I do it visually for folks if I'm working with them and they want to really understand this bogging and where the power band of the engine is. I'll make a couple of simple math channels, and that's what these two blue lines are. It looks a little bit weird at first, but what I've done is I come in and there's a math channel down here. It's called min RPM. And the math channel is like nothing else you've ever seen, right? It's just a value. There is no formula or anything. I've just told it at 9,000 RPM, I want a channel, right? I want a line. And I I scale it so it matches the RPM. That's kind of critical since this is a visual tool that you have to have the scaling the same as your RPM. And we're only sampling it at 1 per second because it actually doesn't change, right? This line is just gonna sit there. Did the same thing with a max RPM number of 13. What we're saying is the power band on this motor happens to be between 9,000 and 13. If you know DD2s, that may or may not be exactly right, but for our purposes here of discussion, that's what I selected. Okay, so I've got these two math channels, and let me click on OK. And what you'll see here now is the RPM is sitting here, and normally we would have to take a look at it and play with it a little bit, but and put the cursor here and try to figure, okay, well, yeah, we're at 7,500. And remember what the number is. Well, visually now, Eric talked about him being a visual learner as much, and there's lots of people that are like that. I can quickly look across this and say, well, maybe we're out of the power band just a tick at the top, maybe, and certainly on a couple of these slow corners, we're below the 9,000 that we're kind of targeting. Here's that gearing thing that this might make it fairly quick for somebody to say, okay, I see that. Maybe we need to change that gearing or do a better balance of being over on the top and on the bottom, and where the acceleration rates and things like that. So that's what those two lines are for, just so everybody sees it. Before I turn it over to Eric to actually analyze the data, we then made a bogging channel. And what this bogging channel is, it's in yellow down here now, is, if I can find it, there it is right there. And it's just like Ray Phillips talked about last weekend with the power of if, right? In the previous webinar. What we're doing is we're creating a little switch channel that is just saying if the RPM is less than 9,000, give us a 1 in this channel. If not, put a 0. So what you can see by that, let me move that off to the side. So anytime this is below the 9,000 RPM, boom, we've got these little things popping up, right? And because we've now got that switch channel built, there's a lot of stuff we can do now that we have isolated out, found the areas where the cart is what we'll call bogging, a little low RPM, below what we think is the best RPM. I could easily tweak this by just saying 9,500, and this would narrow up and only hit find the spots under 9,500. I'm going to leave it at 9. Okay. Then we've got this other channel down here below. It's called bogging T and bogging D. A little shorthand, but now we're going to count the amount of time that this cart is running along and is under this 9,000 RPM. So right here where I've got the cursor, up until that spot on the track, the driver has been 3 seconds that it's been bogging up until this spot on the track. And it's been 152.9 feet. The way those math channels look, I'm not going to go into them deeply. These are contact me via email. I can send some of these to you, give you a better explanation. But there's bogging time. We just take the lap integral of the bogging channel, and anytime it's a 1, it just counts time. And you'll see that it flattens out here. It's not going up when it's not. And every time it hits one of these, you can see it jumps up, goes flat, jumps up. And at the end of the lap, we can come over here. I got to count. And before I jump out, I'll show you the distance. The distance is the integral, and we do some math that turns in the GPS speed into a distance traveled, and we put all that together and we get the number of feet. So if I put the cursor over here towards the end of the lap where it's flat, it's no longer below the number, you end up with, for that lap, the driver was bogging for 11.6 seconds. Here, the maximum number is the total amount, and 598.9 feet. So just kind of an interesting take, right? And if you grab another couple of laps and we turn on our per lap color so we can see it a little bit better, and we put the cursor over here towards the end, we can now see that here's the 3 laps that I just randomly selected. I'm not going to do a deep analysis on it, but the 11.6, 12.7, 12.3, the blue one had the longest bogging, and you can kind of see that, and he was down here a little longer here, a little bit below in this area, and maybe here a little bit longer. And the distance traveled was about 40, almost 50 feet longer on the 2 laps, the red one being the better of those, and the red lap consistently is the fastest of the 3. right? So there is in this case, maybe a connection to that. So, and all of this done without any additional sensors, right? Right, Eric? All of it done. We're just looking at RPM, doing some math channels, and we're ending up with this this bogging channel. You have anything to add to that before we take a look at something else?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to pull up actually those couple laps again,
okay,
and just make a quick observation. So all of these math channels are great, right? But they're basically refining a conclusion that we could see once we had the bogging channel itself. You know, Roger, one comment you made to me before this kind of led me to this point, which is, and I'll just take control here for just a second.
It's yours.
This particular corner here, Roger, you made a comment that you said, well, it might be a little unfair to expect this particular driver in this corner. I mean, just again, visually look at the corner, to realistically stay above a certain minimum RPM the whole way around the corner. It might just be too tight. You know, the cart may just have to go at such a speed that the RPM inevitably is going to drop below the power band. Naturally and intuitively, the thought is, well, if we can minimize that time, then hopefully we're going to be going through that corner a little bit faster. So with these tools, we can see right here using the time compare bar, we can see that the laps were fairly consistent, even if we have some variety in when the power band was actually bogging, until we get to this corner. So now I may transition away. I may turn off these bogging channels just for a minute and focus specifically on that area, because I can see from the engine data, looking at nothing else other than the RPM channel, just how powerful these channels are, to come to a conclusion that, again, there's a driving issue, a line issue that we might want to look at in this particular corner. Having the additional sensors now of the steering and the throttle, if we pull those up, that's going to give us that much more info and input on these particular corners. So my steering percent and my brake pressure and my throttle, and we're getting super, super, super busy here, so I think I'm going to get rid of a couple.
Yeah. I think they're lower. There you go.
Oh, overshot.
Just a little bit. It's interesting. We always, why he's doing that, we always go for the what happened, where it happened, why did it happen. He used those first set of channels to walk his way down, but he doesn't understand fully why yet. Now he sees it. He doesn't even understands where. So now he's turning off a few things, and he's going to go find, you know, okay, why did it happen? You know, what exactly was it, right? So
So I'm going to turn off the min-max RPM, because I know that I really want to focus on this particular corner. So at that point, I'm just going to turn that off temporarily. And I want to look at the steering behavior, and I want to look at his brake behavior, because I think that that's where those variances are going to be happening. So we'll zoom in a little bit. Hopefully I didn't make a grand mistake here, and hopefully
you're doing okay.
When I zoom in, and you have to zoom in pretty far, we can see, again, we've got some pretty substantial differences in line here. I immediately, and again, to Roger's credit, talking about things happening in previous corners that can affect the corner existingly, I immediately, my eye snaps to the results coming out of the corner. That then leads me to think, okay, there must have been some sort of issue here leading into the corner. And indeed, if we look at, I believe we've got our brake pressure here.
That's the one.
Robbie's chat is in the way. You can see a pretty big variety in the brake pressure channel. I can make this one in particular a little bit bigger. Let me go ahead and get rid of the steering for a change, as well as
the bogging switch right there at the bottom.
As well as the bogging switch.
Yeah. There you go.
And
last thing I would do is let me have it for a second. Let me fix it for you. If I come up here and just turn everything into its own channel, you'll have a little bit more visual. There you go.
There you go. So first and foremost, we can see on the throttle, you know, where he actually jumps off the throttle. That's going to be a big issue. If we're jumping out of the throttle at different points, inevitably our power band is going to be different through the whole corner. So this would be something that I'd really like to see tightened up. We know that our fastest lap was the red lap. Looks like on the blue lap, and it follows based on our looking at the lines here, we can see that On the lap that is in teal here, this 58.4, we got a little overzealous in this corner. And on the one that is kind of this bright neon green, which is fairly close on lap time, we basically underdrove it. So more than anything, this would be when I'd go do a track walk with this driver and find a reference point, because this driver in particular is so inconsistent getting into this corner. That is where a big part of our power band issue is coming from. So I may step back from taking a look at the power band issue, and rather than saying, one of the biggest areas in my entire lap where I'm losing a lot, or I'm below my maximum or my ideal power band, it's not necessarily because I'm geared wrong. It may just be because the driver is making such inconsistent decisions when they jump out of the throttle or when they apply the brake. If you look at the brake pressure map, at least where they start to apply it, logically it's inconsistent, but it looks like at least our peak where we're applying it is, again, inconsistent, but it's not as inconsistent. It seems like the biggest thing is where they release the throttle and then begin to slow down for the corner. That, more than changing the gearing on the car, might be where I'd want to start. So with these additional tools, these additional sensors, you can figure out not only, again, the what, or how much distance an engine might be bogging, or particularly where you're having those issues, but also why. Is it a driver issue, or is it something where we need to actually change the gearing?
Perfect. Yeah, the what happened, where it happened, why did it happen, and then how to fix it. Right? There's always more steps, right? But as a driver coach or data guy, especially if you're working with somebody else, there's always you got to transfer that information, right? So the only other thing that I would like to show, we're kind of up on it on time. I'm going to zoom back out, and I want to show one more thing as we're kind of closing this down. It's one I call bogging filtered. We went over that bogging part a moment ago, right? And we talked about the numbers, and but what was not fair to maybe to the driver, or you try to get this bogging number as low as you can, but what we were doing without the additional sensors that we might have is while we were coming down here, it's not really fair to, let me zoom in just a tick, and let's make those a little bit wider again, and maybe we'll get rid of all but one of the laps just for fun. Boom, and then boom. Let's turn off a couple of the laps just to make it a little easier to see. And measures. Let's turn off the per lap color. Or turn it on. See down when it's down here. Remember the other one? If it went below that line, it started counting it as a bog, right? Even though the driver was still off the throttle, on the brakes, coming into the corner, it was counting that as a bog. And one of the cool things by having that additional sensor, you can actually then start to filter the data. And what we've built is a math channel here that, if I come down here, bogging filtered right here, what we've done is done that exact same thing. If the RPM is less than 9,000, it's bogging. But we filtered it with another if statement. But if the throttle is, but only do that, and if the throttle is greater than 80%, this one happens to have a throttle position sensor. So now we're only going to get the bogging when the driver is actually flooring it, which is really more specific and correct in the way that you would hear it or feel it in the cart, right? So let's cancel out of that. And now our bogging really doesn't start until the driver is crossed over the 80% threshold and is below the 9,000 RPM. And now all of a sudden we've got this bog. I don't remember the numbers, maybe you guys do, but if I come over here and click at the end, we're down to 3.5 seconds, which is a much more realistic number of when the cart was bogging on these laps, right? Instead of the 7 or 8 seconds, I think that we were showing before. So it's, and the distances are time and distance is substantially lower. The power of having those additional sensors to get to where you could do a channels report and watch and coach a driver saying, hey, let's look over all 20 of your laps during the practice and the qualifying runs and see if you have really been working on rolling through the middle of the corner. Maybe that gear change helped us a lot, and our bogging numbers are substantially lower because that's a goal of ours. But in this particular, the way we're looking at this data right now, and so this throttle position sensor has really helped us filter that down. So just wanted to make sure we kind of covered that before we're on the way out. You've got these math channels, you'll have them. I know Robbie's already linked them, but as I said, you'll get the link of them in the description box of the YouTube. So Anything else you want to add to that, Eric, as we're kind of closing things up? We've kind of gone just a couple minutes long, not terrible.
Yeah, we went a little bit long, but I think it's inevitable when you're looking at something that requires a little bit more explanation. We had a lot of questions from people, and thank you for that, to everyone that interacted with this. But hopefully this demonstrates some of the additional math channels that you can do either without additional sensors or the power of having those additional sensors. We didn't really dive that much into the steering sensor, but you could do something similar to filtering the throttle channel we did here with, okay, let's, from a kart handling standpoint, let's say I know that just from driver intuition, if I turn the steering wheel any more than maybe 10 degrees, maybe the kart's understeering, or maybe it's oversteering, something to that. You can do those sorts of things with those additional sensors. So basically, the more, the top level thing I would say is by being intentional with what we want to find and using the tools that we have available to us, both built into Race Studio as well as the additional sensors, you can go a lot further into some very advanced determinations if you're finding yourself kind of hitting a glass ceiling of, well, I've really made a lot of progress with the traditional tools, but I know I'm still struggling in certain areas. Why am I struggling? The Aim Race Studio and the MyChron, as well as the whole suite of Aim Race products, are going to be there to be able to help you kind of break through that and find a little bit more with these math channels.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's what our goal was today, as Eric and I were kind of prepping and getting ready for this, was to show how math channels and a little bit of a deeper look into the data can happen even without having the additional sensors, but just looking at it in different ways with maybe some math channels or just even different ways of looking at it, and then show you a little bit of some additional sensors and how we could make that even more powerful. So, and I think we did that. I'm going to answer these two questions as we kind of close out here, Eric. And one of the first one is from John. I'm assuming that bogging can be used with a car. That particular way of looking at it is certainly any not just cars, motorcycles, whatever. If a motor is susceptible to not making a ton of power down low, and you want to quantify that, build that bogging channel, and boy, you can throw that, how much time did I bog in a channel report, and be able to see that within 30 seconds of downloading the data without having to open up every lap and take a look, because you've mathematically calculated it. And Joe, we'll talk about that real briefly, because I actually was doing it and I didn't show it as much, but here is a GPS track map. Joe's asking, how do I make the GPS view show one particular channel and then change it to another channel? And what I've done here is and I'll do it for filtered bogging, and I'll do it for unfiltered bogging, just so we can see visually see the difference. What I've got here is I've got this measures, this GPS map is showing when this channel of bogging filter is a 1, it goes to red. If it's not, it's blue. Right? So these are right here, you can see them, but boy, you can now pick it up over here on the GPS map and see exactly where on the track it's happening on top of it. Some of us are, again, very visual. We need to put together where we are out on the track. So right here, you can see it coming off that corner. There's the largest bog is coming off of this corner, and there it is right there. You can see the cursor. Let's change that to not the filtered bogging, but the regular bogging. It's as easy as click on the GPS map itself. This little icon up here is the settings, and you can pick any channel that is part of your data, sensors or math channels. So I've got bogging right here above it, and that one's not filtered, so it's going to go back to not using the throttle to take away when it's less than 80%. So I'm going to apply an exit, and look at how much more red shows up in that map, right? Well, now that we're there, let's bring up the bogging channel. Let's put it's on a different one. So let's turn off a couple of these just for fun, to make it a little bit easier to see. Let's leave the RPM on, and let's turn. Oops, I want that one on. This one and this one. Here is one of them is bogging and one's bogging filtered, so you can see the two on top of each other. There's a whole area here where the driver is off the throttle, but yet we were calling it bogging. Where down here, because the driver was off the throttle, we filtered it out. And look how much more of the red you can see over in the GPS map. Changing this to any channel is that easy. Click on it, and if you want to see it based on what it might look like in a speed trace, red being the fastest, green and blue being the slowest corners. There's speed, just as simple as coming over and double clicking on this, right? So here's when he's on the brakes. I've built a math channel called brake on. There's the red is every time the driver is actually on the brake exceeding a certain brake pressure. So hopefully hopefully that answered your question there. Ray says you need to make sure per lap color is unchecked. If you ever come in and you find that it's a single color, the per lap color not only covers all of per lap colors over here, but it's boss over the GPS map as well. So if you ever have a single color and you're expecting it not to be, it's because your per lap color has been checked. So perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the tip, Ray. Okay, let's jump out of there and let's go share back to the presentation. And let's I'm going to launch a poll here really quickly, just so we have it as I'm kind of getting ready to kind of close this out and announce what our next webinar is going to be. Data analysis frequency. Thought we would like to just ask you really quickly, how often do you look at your racing data? And this is multiple choice. Don't just pick them all, but maybe pick your top 3. Do you look at your data after each session? When I can, probably multiple times during the day, but certainly not every time I'm there. The karters that are in here in the group today, karting, it happens in a real hurry, right? You don't have a ton of time back in the paddock area. Like when we moved from karting into Spec Miata as a family team, I was amazed at how much time I had in between my sessions. We were going on the track 3 or 4 times. You don't always have it in sports cars, but it was amazing that the end of a Friday or an end of a Saturday in a kart race, boy, I was whooped, right? And I didn't drive a lap, right? It's just you're working on the karts and you're always heading back out on the track. So how often are you taking a look at your data? I'm going to end that polling in just a moment, and then we'll share it. Meanwhile, this webinar and all of these webinars we've been doing, this is number 41 again. We've currently got 107 videos up on our LearnFast YouTube site. Go ahead and take a look at some of them, not just the webinars, but tons of other ones, how to work with that GPS map, how to do the data views. We did those real quickly. I went to the mixed view and the tiled view a couple times today real quickly. How to open and make the lines wider are all videos that are in here for you to take a look at if you missed exactly how we did that. Let's end that polling. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to share it with you. The number one of ways that you look at your racing data is at the end of the track day. That's 82% of you are doing that. You might be doing it because of the way the poll is giving you multiple choices. You might be doing some other things before that. At home after the track event is the second place one at 77%, and then third is after each session of the track at 72%. I'm sorry. So there's what a lot of folks will do is they'll John Block mentioned it, and I think Ray mentioned it as well. Often they'll take a look at the data right when you come off the track, after you have a sip of water and cool down a little bit, download the data, take that quick look. That 10 or 15 minute look. We've had some webinars just about that, and then later on you dig in and maybe you'll start looking at some driver improvement stuff instead of the vehicle health stuff, and you do multiples of these. So thank you for sharing and taking the poll. I appreciate that. So. Let's get that out of the way. Yep. And then let's talk about, AIM as a support company. We love to have people like Eric and Ray and John Block and Matt Romanowski and Peter and all of these co-hosts we've brought on. You'll notice a trend that they're very, very support oriented. And we love to have those guys as dealers and folks that are helping us, because we're really a customer support company. These are tools that are super powerful, and people, need to have questions and they want to learn more. There's just so much information there that it's great that we've got dealers and of course the staff here that are always there to help you. Give us a call or see us out at the track. We're traveling like crazy, just like a lot of you guys are as well now. Next webinar is going to be on Thursday, on August 20th. We're going to have a new co-host. The first time that Chris has joined us. I've known Chris for quite a long time. He's actually helped me in a number of webinars in the New Jersey, New York City area. Come and help me do some of the advanced seminars that we've given up in that area. Chris is going to join us. Chris is a race car driver. He works on cars. He manages teams, and one of the things that we've been chatting back and forth, and what he wanted to do is he was very complimentary of Robinson and Matt and some of the others that have talked a little bit about alarms and configurations and such. But he wanted to maybe dig in a little bit deeper and show some of the ways that he, especially in his endurance racing cars, where they build some alarms that give the driver even more either lead in when things are starting to go wrong and not need instant attention, and then give them some ideas of how to let the driver know what is happening, and pit stops and some other things. So looking forward to having Chris join us on Thursday the 20th here, coming up in just a couple of days, to talk about digging deeper into alarms and show some of the different experiences he has and the way that he builds them. Of course, we always share those configurations with you when we're done with it, so you'll be able to grab those and maybe implement some of these things yourself. So hope everybody's coming back with us and see you on Thursday. That'll be a good time. Looking forward to working with Chris. Eric, we went a little long, but not terrible, I suppose. But I appreciate you coming. I know it's a lot of work to put these things together. You've done a great job. Every time you come, we get lots of great feedback, and I'm sure we will again, not just from the karting guys, but seeing how you attack the data analysis. And so I really appreciate you coming and doing this. So, anything else you'd like to add to the folks and on our way out?
Biggest thing is just thank you for your opportunity and being able to chat with everything and everyone about this. And I learn a lot every time I get on these, both from the poll questions as well as the questions that people ask. So hopefully this was valuable to everyone. And, just don't forget to keep reaching out to myself or Roger or just anyone at AIM. These tools are there to help you get faster and enjoy the sport that we all love and care about.
Learning is of course the biggest point, but the funnier thing that as we're closing out here, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure there, but I think every single webinar we've done so far, and this is number 41, I have learned something new in preparation for or giving these webinars. And I know you've learned some stuff today, and I know a lot of the folks that have joined us were learning stuff as well. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to all the AIM guys in the background that were answering questions and having a good time. Looking forward to seeing you all coming on Thursday with Chris. Thanks guys for coming, and I'll talk to you soon.